Once upon a time, in a world long ago, but not so far away, I was living in Concord and working in the city. Fresh out of college and not yet the owner of a car, getting from home to work and back again involved a long walk, a bus, and a Marr train ride. One evening, while I was waiting for the train at the Montgomery Street station, I was struck, emotionally, by a woman who was standing on the platform playing the violin. She was dressed in an apparently antique black dress, 1930s look like, black shoes and stockings with a line up the back of the leg, a hat and a black veil. She had the light of someone not quite in this world, a wild, blank look in her eyes, the look of someone living in a reality far, far away from the world she was standing in. Her playing was haunting, emotional, dreamy, beautiful. The kind of music that touches people's memories and pulls their mind to places not visited often. In April of this year, Elon Musk made the bold claim that Teslas will be available by the end of the year with fully self-driving mode. Don't worry, I'll get back to my violinist. Of course, Elon has made similar claims before, the first one in 2016. So I'm not holding my breath on the arrival of cars actually capable of driving themselves. But the day is coming. There will come a day where we can actually take a nap and travel in our private car without a human driver to our destination. While the companies trying to be the one to do this are working frantically on getting their cars to be able to both see and recognize hazards, I expect in some back rooms, they're also working on the ability of the AI to make decisions about how to respond to such events. Right now, the decision-making capabilities of the system is pretty limited. It consists mostly of recognizing a hazard and either braking to a stop or steering around it. Something that's workable as long as there is a driver who's actually paying attention. But in order for the driver to take a nap, the car will need to be able to make much more complicated decisions. Well, and see a whole lot better than it does too, but that's a different issue. Decisions that will eventually need to include moral and ethical considerations. We want to pretend that such decisions need not be part of the car's programming. All it needs to do, the developers tell us, and probably tell themselves, and we tell ourselves, is recognize hazards and avoid them. Over the centuries, we as humans have mostly come to a consensus of what we expect of drivers traveling at speed, starting with people on horses. We readily concede, for instance, that a person driving a car has an absolute right to save their own life, even at the expense of others, passengers, other cars, pedestrians. We also consent to the idea that a person would be expected to protect the lives of people they know and love over the lives of strangers. While there have been a few cases where a person was charged with manslaughter for failing to risk their life to save someone, without any prior negligence on the part of the defendant, none have resulted in convictions. Even if the person had some standard of care expected, such as you might have for a firefighter, a policeman, a bodyguard, or a doctor. We don't even require parents to risk their life to save the life of a child after it's born. Scott Peterson, the former school resource officer for Stoneman High School in Parkland, Florida, was recently acquitted of criminal charges for failing to confront the shooter. We may call him a coward, never hire him, throw insults and eggs at him, and generally vilify him to the greatest extent possible. We still do not demand that he put his life at risk for others. We also, as a people, generally agree that if there needs to be a choice between saving one life at the cost of many, or saving many lives at the cost of one, that is generally correct to protect the many. Although we do not require someone to choose to die themselves, even at the cost of many other lives, although we do respect and praise such actions. These are distinctions that are important in a car accident. While we demand a certain level of care when driving a car to avoid unnecessary risk to others, such as being sober, knowing how to drive a car, not watching a movie, and we can and often do imprison people for murder if they fail to take such care and it results in death. If reasonable care was taken, we do not hold people criminally responsible for deaths in a traffic accident. Even if death occurred because someone under extreme stress made a bad decision, we allow humans to be humans. We do not, legally at least, demand that a person always make the right decision in that moment. But now we're talking about programming a machine to make those decisions. And writing those programs requires decisions on what we consider reasonable programming. While a human getting in a car wreck is making decisions unprepared and in an instant, every decision a machine makes will be made with malice of forethought. All of the decision criteria must be decided beforehand and programmed in. People think AI make these decisions themselves. They don't. We have to decide what it is and tell them. We need to actually decide, clarify, and codify what is proper and fair when we're weighing the life and death of different individuals. While we may consider that a human is not expected to drive a car off of a bridge to certain death in order to avoid plowing into a crowd, killing many, we may not feel that a machine should be programmed to make that decision that way. And as a result, a self-driving car deciding to plow into a crowd to save the driver may well end up with wrongful death lawsuits and even criminal charges against the company that decided to write the program to make the decision that way. The car company can't win. No matter who dies, there will likely be a lawsuit over it. And car buyers are likely to have objections if there are any situations where the car will choose to sacrifice the occupants of the vehicle. Since the car cannot actually avoid all hazards and problems, at some point, legal precedent will begin to be set. The society at large will need to decide what decisions the car must make. Even in early testing, so far there have been around 20 deaths attributed to cars in self-drive mode. Right now, the cause of nearly all deaths is that the car did not recognize the hazard. So making a decision about what to do about the hazard is not yet relevant. Eventually, cars will be able to recognize the world around them, and as if deciding when a car should sacrifice the occupants of the car for other lives or choose between killing one pedestrian and several wasn't difficult enough, eventually there'll need to be decisions about killing this person or that person. With humans, deciding between individuals is mostly going to fall into two categories. I know the person or I do not. People they know generally being more likely to be protected. But if a human driver needs to decide between the young woman walking on the side of the road or the man in the oncoming car, chances are the human does not know either one of these people. Decisions are likely to be made by categories. The path least likely to kill the driver, probably the top of the list. Then protecting a woman over a man, or perhaps the young over the old, or wealthy over poor, or perhaps what their clothes represent, or white over brown, or a lot of decision points that individuals may have and use, and maybe not even know they use. They made that decision so fast, and which would get great objections should we choose to actually use them in programming a car to make life and death decisions. Of course, we do not like the very idea of deciding the relative value of individuals. Unfortunately, this is a decision that sometimes needs to be made. And as cultures, as people, as humans, we do place relative value on humans. How many Marines would die to save the President of the US? In general, world leaders hold a place of higher importance, and it's usually the case that many will die to protect such a person. We value a leader as more valuable than the individual soldiers there to protect him, more valuable than a farm worker who likely has no Marines at all, risking their life to keep him alive. So given that, might it make sense, should we get to a world where self-driving cars are the norm, for people of high importance, such as the president, to have transponders, so the cars know who they are and can protect them? Now, who would want such a transponder? How many lawmakers would pass laws to protect themselves and then their families? How many people would simply buy the right to put themselves on the protect list? Lord knows Elon Musk would sell it to them. Until so many people are on the list that eventually more than one of them will be endangered at the same time, and now the car must decide between them with transponders that identify the individual. This is a situation that belongs to a world not likely to come into existence in my life. But this is a reality that will arrive in stages. And it starts to bring the question of how we value human lives a little bit out of a philosophy class exercise and a little closer to real world discussion. We might ask ourselves, how would I set that criteria? Of course, it's easy to just say we're all the same in God's eyes. If we were to look at this from the perspective of all of time and all of the universe and ask ourselves, if a farm worker is more or less important than a world leader, the truth is it doesn't matter. It's like looking at the difference between 1 and 5 relative to the entire number line. It's just not a difference that makes a difference. An easy out, hardly useful one. Only God actually values us all the same. We live in the human world. If we're looking at it from the point of view of the effect it has on our lives, if the farm worker has a heart attack today, the tomatoes will still get picked. But if a world leader dies, conflict could kill thousands. Is this now a 1 or a 5 on a scale of 1 to 10? But how would that death affect each man's 3-year-old child? Now we're looking at a 1 on a scale of 1 to 1 and a 5 on a scale of 5 to 5. In each case, that life means everything. The farm worker's young daughter is not likely to understand or agree with the idea that her father should die so that the president should live. What if there comes a day when that car can look at any individual and know who they are and then access the entire database of stored information on that person? And then value each of us against each other. And when a choice needs to be made, choose the higher value person. What criteria are we likely to use to determine relative value? Reproductive success? Tried and true valuation by evolution? Wealth? Education? Productivity? Fame? Political values? Church affiliations? Twitter followers? Sorry, X. These are the things we humans tend to decide are better, more valuable. When a wrongful death lawsuit is settled, they may consider how much income the deceased had, how many dependents were left behind, what works did they do in the community, how much education did they have, how many productive years did they still have. There's no value given for singing to their grandchildren or writing poetry on their lunch break or being able to hike to the top of Mount Fuji. And what if the person who really has nothing, supported by the government, mean to the neighbors, alienated from their family, addicted, doesn't take care of their dog? Guess it would keep you off the street if you knew you were the top of the list should some random car be looking to cushion an impact. Whatever criteria we use, it can't help but be woefully simplistic relative to the problem. As I rode the train home that night, when I looked at the people in the car, I could tell the people who got on at Montgomery Street. They had a different look about them. They were alive, thinking, dreaming. They had a light in their eyes, not looking blankly out the window or staring blankly at the newspaper. Even me, rather than closing my eyes and daydreaming until I got to my stop, I was looking around me. Not just looking, but seeing, noticing. And today I wonder, how valuable was she? What would be the importance of knocking a couple hundred people out of commuter autopilot for one evening? For giving people an hour of life that is normally spent marking time in pseudo-death? How much would it have mattered if a frail, young, crazy woman with a violin had been killed by a car that afternoon and never opened her case for the Montgomery Street evening commute? Would those people have missed an hour of life if they didn't know they could have had it? Would we miss a flushing toilet if we didn't know it could exist? Part of my mind cries out, surely if any single human has value, she must. She's unique. She's a talented artist. Of what value is the information systems developed by IBM's top engineer if we spend most of our lives drifting by as undead zombies? What, in fact, could be more important than someone who can wake us up? Someone to induce us to live, to feel the hours and days instead of letting them pass us by. But even if she were to change the lives of every person who heard her, how many lives is that in relation to the entire world population? What difference did it really make? I got on BART the next morning and most of the faces were still blank. Most of the people, like me, would wake up one morning surprised to find themselves old. What value is her gift when weighed against the flushing toilet? Never mind the convenience, think of disease in dense populations. How do we weigh one against the other? How much difference does the toilet really make? Would we find other ways to solve the problem? Perhaps the ease just makes us complacent, puts us to sleep. Do we need people like her to maintain our humanity? If there was no colorful sax players and corner preachers and crazy, dirty bakers, what would happen to the drones working in a city? If I were forced to choose between the violinist dying before reaching the BART station and Thomas Crapper, real name folks, I don't make this poop up, dying before he invented the flushing toilet, who would I choose? What would happen if we do not protect our more productive, smarter, more fertile people, even at the cost of the lesser members of our society? Will we end up overrun by people who are willing to make those cold decisions? If I use the most accepted criteria to value members of our society, and artists, no matter how talented, is never as important as a farmer, no matter how petty. A crazy woman in a BART station has no value. What difference does it really make if a mostly brain-dead, unmarried, childless receptionist sleeps through her life? Might she, in fact, not be as effective as a receptionist if she wakes up and wants more? Someone, after all, has to do the job. Does that leave us choosing between being a wealthy and long-lasting but unhappy people with the masses marking time in a semi-conscious state, or a briefly flowering, living, feeling, but fleeting culture? I'm not sure it's exactly a binary, but I'm not sure it isn't either. Of questionable wisdom, I expect, but even at the cost of the eternal existence of our very culture, I believe I would choose to let the violence live. That's it.
you, Suli. That was really an interesting